The 10 most impressive miracles in the Bible. We will explore supernatural events that defy natural laws and leave a mark on human faith. Get ready for a journey filled with spiritual wonder as we discover the most amazing miracles in the Bible. Number 10. The release of Sidrak, Masak, and Abednego from the fiery furnace. Gospel of Daniel, chapter 3, verses from 19 to 27. The biblical account of the release of Sidrak, Masak, and Abednego from the fiery furnace is found in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. These 3 men were Hebrews who were taken captive to Babylon during the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar. According to the story, King Nebuchadnezzar ordered everyone in his kingdom to worship a golden statue that he had set up. However, Sidrak, Masak, and Abednego refused to prostrate themselves before the statue, since their faith forbade them to worship other gods than the God of Israel. This angered the king, and he ordered the 3 men to be thrown into a fiery furnace as punishment for their disobedience. The oven was heated 7 times hotter than normal, and the soldiers who brought the men there died from the intense heat. However, when Sidrak, Masak, and Abednego were thrown into the oven, something extraordinary happened. Instead of being consumed by the fire, the men walked into the furnace unscathed. Furthermore, the king and those who were present saw a 4th man in the furnace, whose appearance was like that of a son of the gods. Amazed and convinced of the greatness of the God of Sidrak, Masak, and Abednego, King Nebuchadnezzar called them out of the oven. When the men came out, they didn't have a burnt hair or smell of smoke on their clothes. The king then recognized the supremacy of the God of the Hebrews and promulgated a decree throughout his kingdom, declaring that no one should say anything against the God of Sidrak, Masak, and Abednego. This miracle of deliverance from the fiery furnace demonstrated God's faithfulness to those who trust Him and stand firm in their faith. Number 9. The handle of the floating axe. Gospel of 2 Kings, chapter 6, verses from 1 to 7. The miracle of the floating axe handle is recounted in the Old Testament of the Bible, in the book of 2 Kings. The story tells how a prophet named Elisha helped a group of prophets solve a problem with a lost axe. During one of Elisha's visits to the place where the prophets lived, one of them was cutting wood near the Jordan River. While he was doing his job, the axe he was using came loose from its handle and fell into the water. This was a great inconvenience for the prophet, since the axe did not belong to him and he could not afford to replace it. The distraught prophet explained to Elisha what had happened, and Elisha, aware of his situation, decided to help him. Elisha asked the prophet to point out the exact place where the axe had fallen into the river. So Elisha took a piece of wood and threw it into the water at that spot. What was amazing was that, at that moment, the lost axe miraculously floated on the surface of the water and could be recovered. The prophet was amazed and grateful for this divine act of mercy. This miracle of the floating axe handle illustrates the power and supernatural intervention of God in people's lives. It also shows God's compassion toward His servants and His willingness to help in difficult situations. Number 8. The healing of the Centurion's servant. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 8, verses from 5 to 13. The healing of the Centurion's servant is a miracle recorded in the Bible, in the Gospel of Matthew. This story recounts the encounter between Jesus and a Roman centurion who was seeking the healing of his servant, who was seriously ill and suffered greatly. The centurion, despite being a military officer and not being a Jew, showed great faith in Jesus and firmly believed in his healing power. Recognizing Jesus' authority, the centurion sent some Jewish elders to him to ask him to come and heal his servant. However, when Jesus approached the centurion's house, the centurion sent a message saying, "Lord, I am not worthy for you to come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed." Impressed by the centurion's faith, Jesus praised his faith and, without even going home, declared that the servant was healed. When the messengers returned to the centurion's house, they found the servant completely healthy. This miracle is significant because it demonstrates the greatness of faith, regardless of a person's religious background or provenance. Number 7. The multiplication of the loaves and fishes. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14, verses from 13 to 21. The miracle of the multiplication of the loaves and fishes is one of the best-known stories in the New Testament of the Bible. It is found in all 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This miracle recounts how Jesus fed a multitude of people with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. The story takes place at a time when Jesus was teaching and healing people in a remote region. A large crowd had gathered to listen and follow him. As the day wore on, the crowd began to get hungry and there was not enough food to satisfy everyone. Jesus' disciples informed him of the situation and suggested that the crowd should be sent to nearby towns so they could buy food. But Jesus said to them, "Give them something to eat." The disciples were perplexed, as they only had 5 loaves and 2 fish, clearly insufficient to feed thousands of people. Jesus asked them to bring the loaves and fish, and then he thanked God for them. Then he began to break the loaves and fish into portions and distribute them among the crowd. Incredibly, everyone ate their fill, and there were still 12 baskets full of the leftover fragments left over. This miracle is seen as an act of divine generosity and supernatural power. It is also interpreted as a symbol of God's provision for his people and his ability to meet all of his needs. Number 6. The healing of the man blind from birth. Gospel of John, chapter 9, verses 1 to 7. The miracle of the healing of the man blind from birth is one of the best-known and most significant stories in the Bible. It is found in the Gospel of John. In this account, Jesus and his disciples meet a man blind from birth while walking through the city. The disciples ask Jesus if the man was born blind as a result of his own sins or those of his parents. Jesus replies that neither the man nor his parents sinned, but that his blindness will serve so that the works of God are manifested in him. Then, Jesus spits on the ground, makes mud with his saliva and applies it to the blind man's eyes. He then tells her to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. The man obeys, and when he washes, he recovers his sight completely. The people who knew him are astonished and wonder how it is possible that a man blind from birth can now see. News of the miracle spreads quickly, and the man is brought before the religious authorities, the Pharisees. They doubt the veracity of the miracle and question the man and his parents. But the man insists that Jesus healed him and restored his sight. The Pharisees refuse to accept the miracle and expel the man from the synagogue. Finally, Jesus meets the healed man again and reveals his identity as the Son of God. The man worships him and acknowledges Jesus as his Lord. This miracle was not only a manifestation of the divine power of Jesus, but also a symbol of the spiritual blindness that affects people. Number 5. The Resurrection of Lazarus. Gospel of John, chapter 11, verses from 38 to 44. The resurrection of Lazarus is a miracle recorded in the Bible, specifically in the Gospel of John. According to the story, Lazarus was a friend of Jesus and brother of Martha and Mary. Lazarus became seriously ill and died before Jesus got to his house. When Jesus finally arrived at the town of Bethany, where Lazarus had been buried, Martha and Mary expressed their sadness and told Jesus that if he had been there, his brother would not have died. Jesus was led to the tomb of Lazarus, where he asked that the stone that closed it be removed. Jesus then raised his eyes to heaven and prayed, and after this, he called aloud to Lazarus and ordered him to come out of the tomb. To the astonishment of all present, Lazarus emerged, still wrapped in bandages and his face covered with a shroud. The miracle of the resurrection of Lazarus is considered one of the greatest performed by Jesus during his ministry. Number 4. The fall of the walls of Jericho. Gospel of Joshua, chapter 6, verses from 1 to 20. The biblical account of the fall of the walls of Jericho is a miraculous episode found in the book of Joshua in the Old Testament. It tells how the people of Israel, led by Joshua, conquered the fortified city of Jericho through a divine act. According to the narrative, Jericho was a powerful walled city that presented an obstacle to the Israelites in their advance toward the Promised Land. God commanded Joshua to lead the people around the city once a day for 6 days, taking the Ark of the Covenant with him. 7 priests were to blow ram's horns as they marched, and the rest of the people were to remain silent. On the 7th day, God instructed the Israelites to march around the city 7 times. At the end of the 7th round, the priests had to blow their horns and all the people had to shout. Joshua and the people obeyed these divine orders to the letter. In response to the obedience and faith of the people, God caused the walls of Jericho to collapse in a supernatural way. The Israelites were able to enter the city and conquered it. However, under God's instructions, all the spoils of the city were to be consecrated and they could not take anything for themselves, except for Rahab and his family, who had helped the Israelite spies and were saved as a promise. The account of the fall of the walls of Jericho is considered a miracle because it defies natural laws and shows the power of God in helping his people to conquer the land that had been promised to them. Number 3. The parting of the Red Sea. Gospel of Exodus, chapter 14, verses from 21 to 22. The biblical miracle of the parting of the Red Sea is an account found in the book of Exodus in the Bible. It narrates the escape of the Israelites led by Moses from slavery in Egypt. After numerous plagues sent by God to persuade Pharaoh to release the Israelites, they were finally released. However, when Pharaoh changed his mind and pursued the Israelites with his army, they found themselves trapped between the sea and the Egyptian army. At that moment, according to the biblical account, God instructed Moses to stretch out his hand over the sea, and miraculously, the waters parted, creating a dry path for the Israelites to cross. The Israelites passed through the sea in the midst of the divided waters, while the Egyptian army pursued them. However, when the Egyptians entered the dry road created by the parting of the sea, the waters returned to their normal place and the army was submerged and drowned. This miracle is considered a powerful act of God to free the Israelites and demonstrate their sovereignty over nature. Number 2. The transformation of water into wine. Gospel of John, chapter 2, verses from 1 to 11. In the biblical account of the multiplication of wine at the wedding in Cana, it is told how Jesus performed a miracle during a wedding in the town of Cana. According to the Gospel of John in the New Testament, Jesus and his disciples were invited to this celebration. During the wedding, the wine ran out, which was an embarrassing and problematic situation, as it was a sign of inhospitality. Jesus' mother, Mary, came up to him and said, "They have no wine." Jesus answered her, "Woman, what have you to do with me? My hour has not yet come." However, Maria told the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Jesus then directed the servants to fill 6 jars with water to the brim. Then he told them to take some out and take it to the ringmaster. When the master of ceremonies tasted the water turned into wine, he was amazed at its quality. Usually, the best wine was served at the beginning of the celebration and then it was changed to a lower quality one, but in this case, the wine that Jesus had transformed was even better than the previous one. This miracle of Jesus at Cana is considered significant. as it was the first public one he performed and ushered in the signs or miracles of him as a manifestation of his divinity. Number 1. The Resurrection of Jesus. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 28, verses from 1 to 10. The resurrection of Jesus is considered the most important miracle in the Bible and one of the central events of Christianity. According to New Testament accounts, Jesus of Nazareth was crucified and died on Calvary, but on the third day, Easter Sunday, he rose from the dead. The resurrection of Jesus is a symbol of hope and eternal life for believers. After his death, his body was placed in a tomb and a large stone was placed at the entrance. However, at dawn on the third day, several women followers of Jesus went to the tomb and found the tomb empty. An angel announced to them that Jesus had risen. Jesus' resurrection was witnessed by his followers and he appeared to many people in the days that followed. These apparitions confirmed his victory over death and strengthened the faith of his followers. Jesus' resurrection also fulfilled Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah and his victory over sin and death. For Christians, the resurrection of Jesus is the foundation of their faith. They believe that through the death and resurrection of Jesus, humanity can be reconciled to God and have the hope of eternal life. The resurrection of Jesus is remembered and celebrated in Holy Week and Easter, being a reminder of the love and power of God manifested in the life and victory over the death of Jesus.